especially mindful of this country at this time, the election, and we know that this country is still extremely divided, thoughts and ideas of the way forward. We pray that you'll raise up a leadership that can unite us around the principles that you've given for us to live by. We also ask that you be with us this morning as we study your word. Help us to rightly divine the true meaning. It's through Jesus that we ask these things. Amen. All right, last week we're in the genealogy, or the list of people of Jacob's family that are going into Egypt. And that begins in verse 8 of chapter 46. And I introduced the thought that some of those names were actually born in Egypt, that they weren't alive at the time the people had when Jacob's family actually moved to Egypt. Does anyone have any concerns or thoughts or ideas that you want to express at this time? It's kind of for me, it was a different thought. I certainly did not go into this study with that concept in mind. But it just seems like looking at the ages of the people and the times that we're given, that some of those names just certainly have to be born after they get to Egypt. And in the case of Benjamin's family, here in Genesis, there's a list of 10 names that are called sons. But if we look at a couple of other places where Benjamin's genealogy is given, there are 5 sons and with a number of grandsons with the same name as the sons in Genesis. That's probably very confusing, but it does appear, at least to me, that some of these people were actually born after they arrived in Egypt. Okay, I want to look at a couple of other thoughts in this genealogy. Look at verse 9, chapter 46. The sons of Reuben were Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. The sons of Simeon were Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. It's the son of a Canaanite woman. As far as I know, that's the only time that there is mention of a Canaanite wife except for Judah. I don't know of any other place in Genesis that it lists the boys marrying a Canaanite wife. We are never told specifically a reason why it was necessary for the people to go to live in isolation in Egypt while the nation was being formed. But by inference, by looking at everything and trying to put it all together, this is one of the reasons to get them away from the temptation of going outside the Hebrew family to get wives, specifically Canaanite wives. It seems as though, and we'll get into this a little bit more in the following chapters, that God wanted these people to live separate and apart from the outside world. Specifically, Canaanite women. I mean, there were certainly other temptations that were out there. We have some cases where the people are bringing false idols with them, household idols. So God wanted those people to be separate and apart and live in isolation. Okay, skip down to verse 12. The sons of Judah were Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. The sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. Now, this is one of the things that we talked about last week as to why you really believe, or I really believe, that some of the people were born in Egypt. There were, in effect, 3 generations born to Judah, or from Judah. 2 of them actually from Judah himself. He left the family after Joseph was sold and moved to Canaan, met a woman there and married her, and had 3 sons. These sons grew to marriage age, 20 years, shall we say. Married Tamar. 2 of them died. Judah was tricked by Tamar into sleeping with her and had Perez. There were twins, but Perez is the one that's listed as being in the genealogy of Christ. So he was born 20 years at least after Joseph went to Egypt. Now, the sons of Perez, which would be literally a 3rd generation, even if 2 of them were directly related to Judah. Am I making sense? I see some puzzled faces here. Perez, the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. Now, what's significant there? Was one of those in the genealogy of Christ? We've actually added a third or another name to the genealogy, Hezron. Okay? So this is significant in the fact that there are 3 generations, plus the 3rd generation is in the lineage of Christ. Okay, Helen? You want to be our runner? We'll give it to her first. Okay.
Now, before you get way into that, when Joseph introduced his sons to his father, and Joseph had been in Egypt all these time, his sons, were they sons of an Egyptian woman or what?
They were sons of an Egyptian woman, yes.
Oh, okay.
They were sons of a priest, as a matter of fact, of an Egyptian priest. Okay? So that's the major points that I wanted to make there. There are 3 generations, and there was only 20 plus years between the time that Joseph was sold to Egypt until he became, number one, the second in command, and then the family started coming. So have 3 families grown up here. It just doesn't fit time-wise. Okay? Look at verse 19. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife. In this reading here, Rachel is the only one that's described as Jacob's wife. You can look at all of the other 3 women that have these, and it just says these were the sons of Leah, Zilpah, or Bilhah. Rachel is the only one described as his wife. Is that important? Why would that be? We're going to see in the next few chapters that Joseph receives the double portion of the inheritance, which is always, not always, but traditionally the oldest son. We've already talked about several times through the course of this that Reuben, Simeon, and Levi were all passed over as leaders in the family. Judah has assumed pretty much the responsibility, but here he is being passed over, or in the next few chapters, he's also going to be passed over. And the firstborn son of Jacob's wife, Joseph, receives that inheritance. That makes that, I think, stand out here a little bit, that, you know, we all know that she was his favorite wife. But it has some significance, too, when it comes to receiving the inheritance. Okay, anything else on the genealogy? Okay, verse 28. Then he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen. Now again here, Jacob is using Judah as the leader. He's the one chosen to go get directions from Joseph of how to get to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. So Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. So Judah and Joseph meet. And Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive." Now here he makes the statement, "Let me see your face," or "now let me die." Now we're going to see that he lives in Goshen for 17 years before he dies. So he has a fair amount of time after this to appreciate seeing Joseph and later his children. Has 17 years to enjoy that. Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, 'My brothers and those of my father's house who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for their occupation has been to feed livestock. They have brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. So it shall be, when Pharaoh calls you and says, "What is your occupation?" that you shall say, "Your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth even till now, both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians." Why is it so important to Joseph that Pharaoh know that his family are shepherds, that their occupation is tending the livestock? Ralph?
I think sometimes it's because of the fact that they eat the grain or eat the ground, eat fodder, what do you want to call it? They eat grass, And the other thing is they're probably afraid of their crops. They didn't have fences to keep them out. They, like years ago, the cattlemen were afraid of sheep herders because they said the sheep ate the grass right down to the roots. And so they had many cattle wars over the fact that the sheep herders were bringing them in. And it's my thought that perhaps they were afraid the animals would come in and eat all their crops because they already went through this starvation, through this, I forgot what you call it. Famine. Thank you very much. I hate to scrabble for words, but when the famine was there, they had a problem with growing crops. Well, now they got crops are growing, and here come these animals. You might eat them all up because I'm sure there's not just a few animals coming in. There's a huge herd coming in.
Yeah, but why then was it necessary that Pharaoh know that?
So he could make people aware that this is happening, fence your yards or whatever, but people could prepare for the animals to come in so that they wouldn't be losing any more crops.
Okay. Well, I'll take a little bit different, kind of wind up at the same place, I suppose. But shepherds are an abomination. Let's attack it this way. Shepherds are an abomination to the Egyptians. Why? Was it because what Ralph was saying, that they were afraid of what their animals would do to the crops? Let's go to Exodus chapter 8. This is, I'm going to start the reading in verse 25. This is during one of the plagues that God has visited upon the Egyptians, the plague of the flies. The land was corrupted because of the swarms of flies. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, "Go sacrifice to your God in the land." He is telling Moses to take his people and go sacrifice. Moses said, "It is not right to do so, for we would be sacrificing the abomination of the Egyptians to the Lord our God. If we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes, then will they not stone us?" If they practice their religion in terms of sacrificing within view of the Egyptians, Moses fears they will be stoned. Is there something about the sacrifice that would be abhorrent to the Egyptians? Probably so. Most of the thinking here is that it would specifically be the sheep, that the sheep were kind of a special animal, and in their eyes, to see that animal slaughtered needlessly would be an abomination. They don't recognize the significance of the sacrifice, the religious significance. To them, it's just an animal that's being killed needlessly. I think what I'm trying to get to here is that Joseph wanted the people to be in isolation. Goshen appears to be an area that was suitable for grazing livestock, but probably not for the agriculture that the Egyptians are known for, immediately surrounding the Nile River. So this was a land that was probably not inhabited by many, if any, Egyptians, It was a place that the people could go and at least initially practice their religion. It's one thing to have a family of 70 to 100 make sacrifices out of view, but when the group gets large, and we see later on that there was probably a couple million people, 600,000 fighting men, and you did that as a group, that would be a major event. Did somebody over here have? Yeah. Paul.
I was trying to say, Jim, there's another thing that when Goshen, a place that they finally met up with God because he was on the mountain in that area?
No, I don't think so, Paul.
It wasn't? That wasn't an area? That,
I don't recall what you're thinking about there.
yeah.
They had left Goshen when they got to Sinai.
Oh,
They
okay.
had crossed the Red Sea when they first started going to the mountain or to Mount Sinai.
Yeah, okay.
That was after Goshen.
Oh, okay.
That was after they left Egypt. You know, I realize that, and I tried to preface this earlier by saying that we're not told specifically. But you try to put it all together, and it just appears as if God was putting his people in a place that they would not be a burden to the Egyptian people. They would be separated from them. They would be in a different place. They could practice their vocation of shepherding, and perhaps even early on, practice their religion in terms of sacrifice. That may be going a little too far in the speculation, but it fits, at least in my mind. Fits. Okay. We're ready for 47 unless somebody has a comment. Chapter 47. Okay. Jim?
Since you brought up that side, I have to repent from the earlier comment. But, you know, if you think in that term, if you think about it, it would appear, you know, in later days when Israel would take over Canaan 40 years from now, no, 300 and some odd years, but when they would take over Canaan, one of the things that they were told was they would kill anyone from the paganistic religions. They wiped them out. That was what they were supposed to do. And the fact that they didn't is what caused them so much grief later on. So maybe it was the fact that the Egyptians felt the same way about their religions, that they felt like this was intruding upon what they believed. And I'm like you, or not like you maybe, I'm guessing here that the fact that they would have created a problem if they weren't out of sight. So going along with what you said, keep them out of sight, out of mind. And because the Egyptians may very much have felt the same way that Israel was commanded to take care of later.
Yeah, out of sight, out of mind is not only in this context, but in later context when the Egyptian people are surrendering their land, their livestock, their bodies, everything to the Pharaoh, and here the Hebrews are just sailing right along, not really affected by any of that. They have the grain from Joseph that they need. I don't know. It's worth thinking about it. And I hadn't really thought about the context that Ralph mentioned about even when the people leave God doesn't want them to be tempted by outside forces. They are to destroy those forces. They are not to leave anything, so that they remain a force unto themselves without temptation from outside. Okay. Verse 47. Then Joseph went and told Pharaoh and said, "My father and my brothers, their flocks and their herds, and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan, and indeed they are in the land of Goshen." Now something is probably new here, because when Pharaoh gave instructions for the family to go get their father and return, his comment was they don't need to really bring anything with them, that we will provide what they need. And here Joseph is telling him that, yes, they are here, but they brought the flocks, their herds, and all that they possess. Pharaoh's not going to have to give them any of the necessities of life, at least immediately, except for the grain, because they have their livestock. They have what they were using to live on in Canaan. And he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Joseph didn't initially take the family, didn't take his father. He took 5 men. We are not told anywhere who those 5 were, how they were chosen. I did find one place, and it was called the Targum of Palestine, that said the 5 were Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Now, was that the ones that were chosen? I don't know. Don't know why or how he chose the 5. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" Now, to me, that seems like a strange question to ask for the very first question. But he wants to know, what is your occupation? They said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers." Not only were we shepherds, but that's our heritage. And they said to Pharaoh, "We have come to dwell in the land because your servants have no pasture for their flocks." The drought is so severe in Canaan that there's not anything for the animals to eat. They have no pasture. So they're coming to Egypt, and they find a place that does have grass, that their animals can live. Some versions, instead of having "we have come to dwell in the land," have come to, we're sojourning in the land, with the thought being that they are telling Pharaoh that to them this is not a long-term arrangement, that they're here for a while until things improve. Little knowing that it's going to be over 400 years before they leave. "Now therefore, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen." Then Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Have your father and brothers dwell in the best of the land. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen, and if you know any competent men among them, then make them chief herdsmen over my livestock." So Pharaoh does have herds of his own. He has livestock, and apparently that does not create any problem with the Egyptians. Seems to be only the Canaanite shepherds that would be an abomination to the Egyptians. And he calls this the best of the land. Then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Now we kind of look at that and don't really see anything unusual. I mean, Jacob is a man of God. For him to bless Pharaoh just seems to be sort of an ordinary run-of-the-mill event. Not anything particularly unusual about it, but from Pharaoh's standpoint, here is the most powerful man in the world, in the known world at that time, being blessed by a lowly shepherd from Canaan. On that surface, it looks like a pretty unusual event. Yet Pharaoh doesn't appear to think anything about it. He just simply looked at Jacob and said, "How old are you?" It also seems like a kind of an unusual question. I mean, we don't normally meet somebody for the first time and say, "How old are you?" Well, in my case, people will look at me and say that, but it's just kind of an unusual. How old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. He's 130 years when he's making this change. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage." Anybody remember how old Isaac was when he died? I think he was 180. Abraham was 175. So Jacob hasn't attained that. He's not there yet. And he's not going to make it. He's going to die in about 17 years. So he'll die at the age of 147. But look at the phrase, "Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life." You know, much of the last, I don't know, I didn't count the chapters, there must be 10 or 12 of them, have been really about the trials of Jacob. He starts out life by having his father consider him a secondary son. He was the primary son of his mother, but a secondary son of his father. That created strife. He had to leave his family because he was afraid his brother was going to kill him. He goes to the land of his fathers to find a wife. He's tricked by Laban into marrying the wrong daughter. Works for her 7 years and then has to work another 7 years to get the wife that he wanted. You just go on and on and on with the trials of Jacob. His sons fail him. Reuben sleeps with his concubine. Simeon and Levi destroy a city, kill everyone in it. Joseph disappears for 20 years. He thinks he's dead. He has not had a pleasant life. And I think I made this statement before. If you compare this, about the only character in the Bible maybe that has more issues would be Job. But he stays strong. In fact, he's probably stronger at the end than he was at the beginning. Jacob had a lot of a lot of issues of his own making: trickery, deceit. Verse 10, so Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. Now Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. You know, there's a lot of discussion about this name, Ramesses. It would have been a very common name in the time of Moses. We see the Egyptians actually building a city called Ramesses in this land before they leave. There's Ramesses 1, 2, and 3. But there is some indication in the literature as far back as 1300 BC that at least a part of this land was called Ramesses. That the Ramesses dynasty was getting started at least by the time of Joseph. Then Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his family's household with bread according to the number in their families. So here they get what they want. They get what they need. Verse 13. Now there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. So here's stage one of the confiscation of all of the wealth of Egypt. Is the first thing that happens is the Egyptians spend all of their money to buy bread, to buy the grain. Joseph isn't, the writer makes a specific point here, is that Joseph is not doing this for his own account, but for Pharaoh's account. Joseph is very scrupulous about making sure that Pharaoh gets the stuff that's coming, the money and the land and the livestock. Verse 15. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed. We have no money left. We can't buy anything, so give it to us." Then Joseph said, "Give your livestock, and I will give you bread for your livestock, if the money is gone." If the money is gone, you have no more money, I'll take your livestock. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, the flocks, and cattle of the herds, and for the donkeys. Thus he fed them with bread in exchange for all their livestock that year. Apparently, this is the first time that horses are mentioned in the Bible. I read that comment. I didn't go back and look for it, but I don't remember any other place that horses. We've read chariots before. Verse 18. When that year had ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We will not hide from my Lord that our money is gone. My Lord also has our herds of livestock. There is nothing left in the sight of my Lord but our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants of Pharaoh. Give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land may not be desolate." give us seed seems to indicate that maybe the famine is ended or the drought is ending, that they are anticipating being able to plant a crop for this year. But just think of going through this, the things that they have had to give up to have bread, and here's this group of people, not very large in number at this point, but that do not appear to be struggling in the same way. Maybe that's not even known to them. Maybe Goshen is so far and so isolated that they're not aware of that. I don't know. But if they were aware of it, I would think there would be some hard feelings. Then Joseph brought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every man of the Egyptians sold his field, because the famine was severe upon them. So the land became Pharaoh's. You know, there's not much left for the people. Their money's gone, their land's gone, their livestock's gone. And as for the people, he moved them into the cities from one end of the borders of Egypt to the other end. You know, that makes some organizational and logistical sense. It would be far easier to distribute the grain if all the people were in one place as opposed to being scattered throughout. Don't know if that was the reason, but it does. Logistics and organization would be much simpler if all the people. Kind of reminds us of what's happened here in this country, doesn't it? That a lot of the farmers and a lot of the industry in many areas are moving to the few large cities that we have. Verse 22, only the land of the priest he did not buy, for the priest had rations allotted to them by Pharaoh, and they ate their rations which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their lands. The priests obviously were treated differently than the ordinary person. They received everything they needed. They didn't have to buy it. So their money wasn't taken. Their livestock, if they owned any, wasn't taken. Their land wasn't taken. That still remained. But they are the only ones that are mentioned as retaining anything. Then Joseph said to the people, indeed, I have bought you and your land this day for Pharaoh. Look, here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And it shall come to pass in the harvest that you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh. 4/5 shall be your own as seed for the field and for your food, for those of your household, and as food for your little ones. So apparently the famine is over. And there is some thought that at this point their land was returned to them. You know, that's not anything that we read about in the Bible. We do not see any place that that occurs, but some historical records do indicate that the land was returned to them at the same time they received their seed for planting the crops. And this tax of 20% remained and may still be there, I don't know, but it remained for a long, long time. So they said, you have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. There doesn't seem to be any hard feeling here about what's happened, about losing everything. In fact, there's gratitude. You have saved our lives. And Joseph made it law over the land of Egypt to this day that Pharaoh should have 1/5 except for the land of the priest, only which did not become Pharaoh's. So there's a little bit of an indication here that the land has gone back. But again, there's nothing specific. It just does, it seems like Joseph's actions here are pretty harsh. I mean, he literally takes everything that the people have, including their, well, they become literal slaves. Jim, where's Jim go? Oh, right behind you there.
The thought that comes to mind here is that if you think about it, the 7 years of plenty, when he gathers that grain from those same people, he's using that then to buy their lands and their all of their money. So it's kind of interesting. It's almost, if you want to think about it, kind of like what a lot of governments do now. But it's still the idea that, he gathered from them. What did he give them when he gathered that grain? We're not told. Yeah. But not much, obviously, because then when he gives it back, he gets everything. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
That is kind of ironic that they're buying back what was originally theirs. Yeah, it really is. Anything else? Let's see if we have time to do the next. So Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions there and grew and multiplied exceedingly. Now think about that. They grew and multiplied exceedingly in relation to what had happened to the Egyptians. It's almost mind-boggling. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. When the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "Now if I have found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. You shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." And we know that that's the cave of Machpelah. And he said, "I will do as you have said." Then he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. So Israel bowed himself on the head of the bed. He is not going to die immediately. We don't know when this occurs, but apparently there is some period of time between this and his actual death. And we'll take that up next week.